Hey, welcome back to the podcast, the Gotham Database Podcast. I'm your host, the Gotham Database person. Now, Vince. Hopefully, you're doing well today. I'm going to do a podcast because I'm going to be releasing a bunch of material on the website. Gotham-database.com is the actual page for checking out what's going on, write ups, and things like that, where you can get a full city, Nightfall Bay, in pieces. But I mean, if you're willing to grab the pieces, you can have a full city with a map for your superhero games for DC Heroes. Again, I have this whole entire binder that I've had since I don't know high school, maybe college, because high school's yeah. I don't know. I ever since I've had the game Batman the role playing game and DC Heroes, the one thing that stuck with me through all my moves was always a couple things: Dungeons and Dragons, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1E, and DC Heroes. Mostly Batman the role playing game is the one thing I've had multiple copies of because it was so cheap. It was $10 when it came out. I had multiple copies of that, so I would spend a lot of downtime just making up characters and pretending this person is part of this. And the one thing that I always did was I made up G.I. Joe. Now, I grew up during the 80s in the perfect age range for G.I. Joe, the Real American Hero cartoon. The comic book, I wasn't so much into the comic book. I did like the comic book, but obviously the toys and the cartoon were a big part of my life as a kid. I was hooked as soon as I watched it. So I know the Joes weren't just another military team; they were more larger than life heroes, specialists in their own right, with unique personalities and skill sets. And let's be real here. And I wrote this in the blog. Who didn't want to storm a Cobra base or parachute out of a burning Skystriker just to land on the ground? Fine. Yeah, the cartoons were a bit cheesy when it came to combat because of, you weren't allowed to show death and things like that. Meanwhile, in the comic book, they were actually able to kill and maim and do things like that because they used real guns. So in the cartoon, they used lasers. So naturally, when I started running role playing games, DC Heroes seemed to kind of fit in the realm of making street level type heroes and villains. So with the Batman the role playing game, it's cut down a lot so that you're playing Batman level or Teen Titans level type games. So naturally, I was just like, maybe I could start writing up Joes and Cobras and things like that, and see if I can convince my friends to play games. No, that didn't work. They didn't really care. A lot of people didn't want to play GI Joe. They liked the idea of GI Joe, but by the time I was in high school in the 90s and when I was starting to write all these things, G.I. Joe basically faded for most of people's lives at that point. G.I. Joe was a mid 80s thing, and most people who were still connected to it got that awful TV series by DIC or Deke with the Got to Get Tough Joe theme. And it was just awfully drawn, and the voices were all different, so it just tanked. And that was close to the 90s, and that was the last we really heard of G.I. Joe. They were still producing figures and things like that in the market, but it didn't really do too well. So it kind of faded. But I kind of, since I was really into it as a kid, and it always left a lasting mark on it, I'm not sure why, but whatever. I started writing up my own things and putting it into the DC universe. Little did I know that there is a connection, because you're like, what does that to do with DC Heroes and Batman and Gotham? Blah, 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 blah. Well, to answer your question there, Mr. Mumbles, it has a lot to do with it, because actually G.I. Joe was part of DC universe back in the World War II era. They actually had a showcase G.I. Joe with a couple issues, and Larry Hama was one of the writers for it, that showcased some of the G.I. Joes. Now, it's not the G.I. Joes we know from the cartoon or the Marvel comics, but it was based on Sergeant Savage and those Joes for World War II. So that, keep that in mind. So there is a weak connection with it being inside DC. Doesn't matter. my universe. I could do whatever the hell I want in my universe. And I was reluctant to put these things in here, but I was talking to Chris, who runs the longest superhero game, I guess, ever since the 80s. He's been running the same type of game in the same universe ever since then. So he was just like, why not? It's your world, dude. Just whatever you want to do. If you want to put it up, put it up. Don't put it up. You have Joe's in your universe? That's awesome. I want to see it, things like that. And I'm like, all right, well, I could do that. So when I first did this whole thing, I slotted um the GI Joe team under the DEO, Department of Extra Normal Operations, and I was like kind of a division that handles threats the government wasn't prepared for. These boots on the ground thing would take care of like the metahumans and terrorists and stuff like that. And I decided that Cobra in the 90s was more of inventing metahumans and stuff like that. So GI Joe fit perfectly into the new environment, so to speak. And they were going toe to toe with Cobra and Cobra, because DC has a version of Cobra with a K. And it was pretty much the same thing as Cobra from G.I. Joe and Marvel. So they had Cobra, who was the leader, and he had a snake-themed cult that was trying to take over the world, just like Cobra from G.I. Joe. And we also had the League of Shadows and the Inner Gang and things like that. And then later on in life, as we moved on, and then we got the show 24 with Keith Sutherland, counterterrorism unit. I was just like, huh. So I'm like, that fits even better. So I actually put G.I. Joe as a military unit under the counterterrorism division of DC. So they had everything they needed: covert ops, field agents, tech specialists. So I restructured it into that branch, thinking it would probably fit a little bit better under there. But now they worked in the political espionage, metahuman threats, and high-stake black ops missions. Duke became a seasoned CTU field commander. Snake Eyes now was just basically a shadow operative who's taken down the League of Shadows and assassins, things like that. Flint running joint operations with Gotham's Special Crime Unit. So I kind of put the Joes into different things in different roles. Now you could play traditional, G.I. Joe with all the stuff I'm writing up, and you don't have to worry about all the stuff I've done for background reasons. But I had a lot of write-ups in my binder, and I'm like, you know what? Let me just throw them on the website and make them part of my universe officially as far as this website is concerned. Is it a stretch to put G.I. Joe into DC Universe? Probably. There is a small connection. It's not a big connection, but I think it's fine. I don't really care. So I'm going to put this up, and if people want to see it, they'll see it. If they were interested in talking about it, they will. I'm going to probably do podcasts as I put up different individuals to kind of talk about it and talk about how I use them in a game. Because I did eventually get to play some games while on my own, solo more recently, as in when solo started becoming a little bit of a thing in around 2010, 2011, 12. When people wouldn't want to play, the original Mythic game, the Red Book, is why I have the original Red Book. That's when everything started kind of for solo role playing officially. Because a lot of people played solo role playing by themselves in different ways. And I always thought running your character through a dungeon or something like that was considered solo play, which I did, only to see what it would be like if I was a player playing this and how hard it would be. So, yeah, I didn't have a Mythic or Game Master emulator when I played it. I just kind of did the whole Gary Gygax thing and ran a character through a dungeon and, is this door locked? And 1d6, yes or no, things like that, because that's how Gary handled it in his games. If he didn't know the answer, he'd just roll 1d6. So I figured, well, no, why not? But I ran a couple things of G.I. Joe, did some missions, solo type missions when I was able to do that. So I kind of talk about the stories with those characters and see how that rolls out. Anyway, Hopefully, this has been entertaining enough for you, and you're enjoying it. Otherwise, I don't know what to say. Gotham-database.com is the website. You can go there. You can follow me on X at Gotham Database. And that's it. I'm going to head out and stay tuned on the blog for more G.I. Joe. Thanks, everybody.